Well, hello, good people. The Pete and Pole Ford is tucked away next door, and in its place is the Lycoming GO-145 that I bought recently. If you're wondering why I bought this engine and what I'm going to do with it, well, so am I wondering, both of those. All I can say is that it's rather an interesting engine, and it was cheap. The engine was designed by Harold Morehouse. That's him on the right in this photograph. The photo was taken after the first flight of the Roche-Doe's flivver plane, which later became the prototype Aronca C2. John Doe's is standing on the left and looking particularly pleased with himself, and so he should. It was not only the first flight of the flivver plane, but also John Doe's first solo. He'd flown in other aeroplanes and had a go at the controls, but he'd hardly had any flying instruction whatsoever. Jean Roche, designer of the flivver plane and the Aronca C2, is standing in the middle. Harold Morehouse had designed and built the two-cylinder engine on the flivver plane. The design was based on this vertical crankshaft ballonet inflating engine that Morehouse had built for Army airships. It was only 42 cubic inches, and Morehouse scaled the design up to 80 cubic inches for aircraft use. The engine was later sold to the Wright Corporation, who produced it under the name Wright Morehouse. The engine rights were eventually sold to the Lincoln Aircraft Corporation of Lincoln, Nebraska, who built it as the Lincoln Rocket, some rocket at 25 horsepower. By the late 1930s, Harold Morehouse was working for Lycoming, where he designed the direct drive O-145 and the geared GO-145. Most Lycoming engines, even ones produced today, were originally designed by Harold Morehouse. The Lycoming O-145, O for opposed and 145 for 145 cubic inches, produced 55 horsepower in direct drive form. The GO-145, G for geared, produced 75 horsepower at a crankshaft speed of 3,200 rpm. However, reduction gearing at a ratio of 27:17 reduced the propeller rpm to little over 2,000. The GO-145 was mainly fitted to the Piper J5A cruiser and the Funk B75L. So this engine was originally on a Piper J5A, but it was evicted in favour of a direct drive Continental. It was then sold to a friend who's building a Wolf Boredom fighter. It's taken him quite a long time. He's done several other projects in the meantime, but he decided he didn't really want the Lycoming on the Boredom fighter. I think he's heading down the Rotax route. He wanted shot of it, and me being an idiot, I made him a silly offer which he accepted. However, I can't resist engines. The 19th century was the century of the steam engine, the 20th century the century of the internal combustion engine, and the 21st century, well, electric cars and alcohol-free beer. I think civilization's going backwards. You might well notice there's no base nuts around here, because these Lycomings, the O-145 and the GO-145, are actually cast iron. The crankcase is split here as in fairly normal practice now, but the cylinders and the crankcase are cast as one, with detachable heads, a detachable top cover and obviously a detachable sump, and then a back case as normal. Again, this back case is actually cast iron, not aluminium, so it's reasonably heavy. The front of the crankcase here is quite bulbous, and it's extended forward compared to the direct drive engine. It's because of the internal spur gear, seen in this Lycoming illustration with the right hand side of the crankcase removed. Let's take the top cover off. Another one of the unusual features on these engines are the dynamic balance weights. They're here on the crankshaft. They move with engine RPM, allegedly for smoothness, but they make the most ghastly clunking sound as you pull the engine over. It is quite normal, so I'm told. Everything's split pin properly. In fact, look at the underside of that piston there. You can see it's all completely clean. This engine is basically brand new. It's had a light overhaul. And the reason we're having a look inside it like this is because I'm not taking it to pieces. That's not the intention of this project. I've cleaned up the cover on the right here with a soft wire brush. It's come up really nicely. And I'll do this one as well shortly. Again, as you can see, it's absolutely as clean as a whistle inside. And the valves have been out, the heads have been apart, and all the work was done under the supervision of a proper inspector. So the engine can have paperwork and it could fly again, which is another reason for me not to pull it to pieces. There are 2 good magnetos and several spares. I used some of the spares sorting out the magneto on the Pete & Pol Ford recently, of course. There's also a carburettor. It's a Stromberg NAS2, and all the inlet pipes as well. So there's 4 pipes that connect the carburettor, which bolts on the bottom of the sump, to the cylinders. It's sort of fairly normal Lycoming practice, with the carburettor bolted on the bottom of the sump, and then 4 pipes through the sump, and then out to the cylinders. There's all the rubber joints, there's gaskets, there's absolutely everything. I need to sort out ignition leads too. It came with an absolute cat's cradle of shielded leads, but I don't really like those, to be honest. I'm going to use automotive lead instead. It fits nicely into the magnetos and doesn't require any modification. These NGK AB6 plugs are really good as well. They've got the smaller size hex for a 14mm plug, and even though the plugs are deeply set in the cylinder head here, with the smaller hex they just fit. The engine also came with this sort of test club propeller. It's an old Evora propeller, it's got a sticker on it, so I guess it came off of Jodel, and it's got quite a lot of accident damage. It's obviously been shortened. I painted it up wondering if it was good enough to use to start the engine, but being geared and 75 horsepower, I think messing around with a stubby little thing like this is just going to lead to trouble. So I'm going to make a new propeller using the blank that I actually glued up for the Pete & Pol engine a while back. So the plan, as well as making a new propeller, is to lift the engine up and take the sump off. I'd like a look inside the sump. I'm sure you would as well. I'll try and upend the thing, sort of put some rags or an oil bath here, not that there's much in it. I have squirted oil down into the oil pump actually, because I don't think that should ever really be dry, and I've avoided turning it over any more than I need to because it hasn't got oil in the system. But once the sump has been off, inspected and back on with a new gasket, you could take the top cover off again and pour oil in. That's the oil filler there. And if I just block off the outlet, which is just an NPT fitting from the oil pump which goes to the gauge, then should be able to turn the engine over and prime the oil system. We can use this stubby prop, turn it over and actually see oil beginning to ooze out of the main bearings and the rod bearings, and that'll prove the oil system's working properly. And then after that, it's just sorting out the ancillaries and fitting them as we go. I'm not intending this to be a very long exercise. Of course, then it's going to get bolted on the back of the Vauxhall, taken down to the lower lawn, and we can rev the hell out of it. Even the exercise in bolting it to the Vauxhall has been made a lot easier, because a gentleman who watches my films and has a rather lovely Luton Minor with an 0145 on the front contacted me and said he had 2 spare engine mounts and would I like one. So this engine mount actually came off a Luton Major. I'll stick a picture of it up on the screen. I don't think the aeroplane's around anymore. Anyway, this mount is absolutely wonderful. It's quite heavy, which is perfect for our purposes. And it'll make bolting the engine on the back of the car a very, very straightforward exercise indeed. So that's about it for this week. I was hoping to have done more, but then I did something stupid like buy another aeroplane, which we'll look at next month. It's not airworthy yet. It does need some work. It last flew in 1986. And of course, some bright spark's going to say it's not an aeroplane, it's a Fred. As always, thank you for watching.